I didn't leave a note. They told me my daughter was gone. I didn't cry either. Not right away. I just sat in my kitchen in Barrie, Ontario, with a cup of tea that I never drank, watching the steam disappear into the cold air, thinking something is wrong, not the kind of wrong that grief explains. A different kind, the kind that sits under your sternum like a stone. My daughter Petra was 41 years old. She had been healthy, she ran, she ate well, she had a good job as a project coordinator at a civil engineering firm in Barrie. She had a husband named Vincent, whom she had married 7 years before and whom I had never quite trusted. Though for years I had told myself that was just a mother's selfishness, the inability to accept that her child had chosen someone else first. Petra died on a Wednesday in late March. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, sudden, unexplained. The paramedics said she was gone before they arrived. Vincent had called 911 at 6:47 in the morning. He said he woke up and she was already cold beside him. I buried my daughter on a gray Saturday in April with 100 people around me, and I held myself together through every handshake, every casserole left on my doorstep, every well-meaning neighbor who told me she was in a better place. Vincent stood beside me at the graveside in a dark coat and cried in a way that looked exactly right. I remember noticing that at the time. Exactly right, like he had practiced the shape of it. After the reception, after the last car had pulled out of my driveway on Coulter Street, I sat alone in my living room and I thought, I do not believe this. I had worked for 22 years as a legal assistant at a family law firm in Barrie. I had sat across from hundreds of people over those years, people hiding money, hiding affairs, hiding entire second lives behind very ordinary-looking faces. I knew what performed grief looked like. I had seen it in custody disputes and estate battles and fraud cases. Vincent's grief looked performed, and I could not let that go. The call came 11 days after the funeral. I didn't leave a note in Mississauga, or Saffin 95 area code, local but not one I had saved. I almost didn't answer. I was exhausted. I had been going through Petra's things in boxes her friend had dropped off, and my hands were dirty and my eyes were swollen, and I nearly let it go to voicemail. I picked up on the fourth ring. Is this Petra's mother, Elaine? I said yes. My name is Gordon. I was Petra's landlord, her old landlord. From before she married Vincent. She rented the upper unit of my house on Bradford Street for 3 years. We stayed in touch. She used to call me on my birthday. There was a pause. I'm very sorry for your loss. She was a wonderful person. I thanked him and waited. People don't call 11 days after a funeral just to say that. I need to show you something, he said. In person, if you're willing. I debated whether to call. I've been going back and forth about it since I heard. But I think you need to see this, Elaine. I don't think I can sit on it in good conscience. I asked him what it was. I'd rather show you than explain it over the phone. Can you come to Bradford Street? Today, if possible. And please, don't mention it to Vincent. Not yet. Just come first, please. I just sat at my kitchen table. Gordon was in his early 70s, a retired high school teacher with a narrow house and a neat front porch. He let me in without much ceremony, offered me tea, which I declined, and then he placed a manila envelope on the kitchen table between us. Petra came to see me, he said, about 2 months ago. She seemed frightened. She said she needed to leave something with someone she trusted, someone who wasn't connected to Vincent or her workplace. She asked if I would keep it for her and not open it unless... He stopped, cleared his throat, unless something happened to her. I looked at the envelope. I opened it 3 days after the funeral, he said quietly. I'm sorry I waited. I kept hoping I was wrong. Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a handwritten letter, 4 pages, in Petra's careful, slanted handwriting. I read it right there at Gordon's kitchen table. He left the room to give me privacy. My daughter's letter told me everything. Vincent had been using her name. That was the core of it. For at least 2.5 years, Vincent had been using Petra's name, her credit history, and, she suspected, her signature, to take out financial products she knew nothing about. She had discovered it by accident. She had gone to refinance her car at her credit union branch on Dunlop Street, and the loan officer had looked at her strangely and asked if she was aware that her credit score had dropped significantly. Petra had not been aware. The loan officer couldn't say more in the branch, but she gave Petra a name and a number, a credit counselor she trusted, and suggested Petra make an appointment that week. What Petra found when she dug into it was a second line of credit in her name at a different financial institution, maxed out. A personal loan she had not applied for, 3 credit cards she had never seen, all carrying balances. The total debt that had been accumulated in her name was, by the time she found it, over $87,000. She had confronted Vincent. He admitted it. He cried. He told her he had made bad investments, a private lending scheme, the kind that circulates in certain circles, the kind that promises 15% annual returns and then disappears. He had lost close to $100,000 of his own money over 18 months, and instead of telling Petra, he had started using her credit to manage the fallout. He promised to fix it. He begged her not to go to the police. He said it would ruin them both. He said he would pay it back quietly. Petra had believed him for a while, but by the time she wrote that letter, she had found something else. Vincent had taken out a life insurance policy on her 2 years earlier without her knowledge, or so she believed. The policy was for $400,000. She had found the paperwork in a folder at the back of his filing cabinet while he was at work. She wrote in the letter, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if I'm being paranoid. But I'm frightened, Mom. And if something happens to me, I need someone to know. I sat at Gordon's kitchen table for a long time after I finished reading. Then I picked up the USB drive. Gordon had a laptop. He plugged it in for me without asking why and left the room again. On the drive was screenshots of the credit accounts, screenshots of what appeared to be internal documents from a financial institution in Barrie, loan approvals, account statements, a wire transfer record, and a photograph taken by Petra on her phone of an insurance policy document. The name of the insurer, the policy number, the beneficiary, Vincent Paul Mercer. The insured, Petra Lynn Mercer. The coverage amount, $400,000. The policy had been taken out 26 months before Petra died. I drove home and I sat in my kitchen again, in the same chair where I had sat the night they told me, and I thought about the stone under my sternum. I thought about Vincent at the graveside with his exactly right grief. I thought about Petra running in the cold in February, healthy and strong. I thought about cardiac arrhythmia, unexplained, no prior history, 41 years old. I didn't a suitcase. I didn't leave a note, but this time I was not numb. This time I was thinking very clearly. I spent the next 4 days being careful. I had learned that from 22 years of legal work. When you have something, don't move until you know what you have and what you need. I called a contact I trusted, a woman I had worked alongside years ago who had since moved to a position with victim services, and I told her what I had, and I asked her who I needed to speak to. She made 2 calls for me and called me back within the hour. The next morning, I drove to the Ontario Provincial Police Detachment on Essa Road, and I asked to speak to someone in criminal investigations. I brought the envelope. I brought the USB. I brought a copy of Petra's letter that I had made at a FedEx office on Bayfield Street the previous afternoon. I sat across from a detective, a woman about my age, with short gray hair and the kind of stillness that comes from having heard many things, and I told her everything from the beginning. I placed the documents on the table. I did not dramatize. I did not theorize. I laid out the facts in the order I had found them, the way I had learned to present information over 2 decades in a law office, and I let her read. She asked me careful questions. She did not make promises, but she did not dismiss me either. She said she wanted to speak to a forensic financial investigator and a pathologist. She said that if the financial records were authentic, there were grounds to examine the circumstances of Petra's death more closely. I said, "Please do that. Please examine everything." Vincent did not know I had been to the police. In the weeks that followed, I maintained the appearance of grief without suspicion. I did a family dinner at his parents' house in Innisfil, and I sat across the table from him, and I passed the breadbasket, and I asked him how he was holding up, and he told me he was taking it one day at a time. I watched his face. He was not frightened. He was comfortable. He believed he was safe. That was the hardest part, not the loss of Petra, which I carried every moment of every day like a wound that had no surface. The hardest part was sitting across from the man I believed had taken her from me and making small talk about the weather in Barrie in May. There was one moment when it nearly broke. He came to my house unannounced one Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks after I had gone to the police. He said he wanted to talk about Petra's personal belongings, some furniture she had left in storage, some boxes of books he thought I might want. He was reasonable. He was kind. He stood in my kitchen exactly where I had stood many times since Petra died, and he spoke about her in the past tense with that same careful shape to his voice. And I stood very still and said, "Thank you, Vincent. Yes, let me think about what I'd like to keep." After he left, I sat down on the kitchen floor. I called my contact at Victim Services and told her I needed to know the status of the investigation. She told me what she could, which was not much, except that things were moving. She told me to stay the course. 6 weeks later, 8 months after Petra's funeral, I received a call from the detective I had met at the OPP detachment. She asked me to come in. The Forensic Financial Review had confirmed that the credit accounts and loans opened in Petra's name were fraudulent. The signatures did not match Petra's verified signature on file at her credit union. A handwriting analyst had provided an opinion. There was also, she said, a toxicology matter. When Petra's case had been reopened for investigation and her original autopsy records reviewed, there were gaps. A supplemental toxicology examination had been ordered. The results had come back. She did not tell me everything that was in the results. She told me enough. Vincent was arrested the following Tuesday morning at a Tim Hortons on Mapleview Drive, where he had gone for his usual coffee before work. He was charged with fraud over $5,000, forgery, and pending the full toxicology report being entered into evidence, 1 count of first-degree murder. I heard about the arrest from my contact at Victim Services, who called me as soon as she was permitted to. I was standing in my front hallway, still in my coat, having just come in from walking the dog. I sat down on the bench by the door and I listened to her and I said, "Thank you." That was all I could say. "Thank you." The case was taken up by the Crown Attorney's office in Barrie. I was not permitted to follow every detail of the investigation as it developed, and I didn't try to push beyond what was appropriate. I had done my part. Petra had done her part. She had been careful enough and brave enough and foresighted enough to leave what she found with someone she trusted. Gordon, who had kept that envelope for 11 days that must have felt like a year, had done his part. I think about what would have happened if Gordon had not called. If he had decided it was not his place, or that he was probably wrong, or that it would only cause more pain. The insurance company would have received Vincent's claim. The financial institutions would have written off the fraudulent debt over time. Petra's death would have remained an unexplained cardiac event in a 41-year-old woman. Vincent would have moved on. I think about that, and then I stop thinking about it because I can't afford to live there. What I know now, what I want other people to know, especially women my age who are watching this and who have daughters or sons in marriages they are not sure about, is this: your instincts are information. The feeling that something is wrong is not always just grief, not always just the difficulty of letting go. Sometimes it is your nervous system telling you something your conscious mind hasn't assembled yet. Pay attention to it. Petra paid attention. She was frightened, but she was not helpless. She gathered what she could find, she documented it, and she left it with someone who would know what to do. That took courage. She did not know, when she put those papers in that envelope, whether she was protecting herself from a husband who might become dangerous or simply preserving evidence in case her instincts turned out to be right. She could not have known how right they were. I carried that envelope in my mind every day between the funeral and the arrest. It made me careful when I wanted to be reckless. It made me patient when every part of me wanted to stand up and scream. The case is ongoing. I have been asked not to discuss the specific details of the toxicology findings until after the trial, and I'll respect that. What I can tell you is that the Crown has what they need. My daughter was 41 years old. She ran in the early mornings along Kempenfeld Bay when the ice was still on the water. She made the best lemon loaf I have ever tasted. She called me every Sunday without fail, even when we had nothing particular to say, just to hear each other's voices. She was paying attention right up to the end. I will spend the rest of my life making sure that meant something. I keep thinking about the envelope, not what was inside it. I've lived with what was inside it every day since that afternoon at Gordon's kitchen table. I mean the act of making it, Petra sitting somewhere alone, writing 4 pages by hand, choosing what to put on a USB drive, sealing it all up, and driving it to an old landlord on Bradford Street because she needed someone outside the situation, someone Vincent would never think to look toward. She did all of that quietly, without telling me, without alarming anyone. She was frightened, and she was clear-headed at the same time. And that combination, I've come to understand, is what kept that evidence intact long enough to matter. There is something I want to say about that, because I think people misunderstand what courage actually looks like in ordinary life. It doesn't usually look like confrontation. It doesn't look like raising your voice or making a scene or refusing to back down in the moment. Sometimes it looks like a woman who is scared and uncertain sitting at a kitchen table and writing down what she knows, carefully, in order because she understands that the truth only has power if it survives. Petra had good judgment. That sounds like a simple thing to say about your own daughter, but I mean it precisely. She knew the difference between what she felt and what she could prove, and she worked to close that gap. She didn't panic when she found the debt in her name. She got an appointment with a credit counselor. She documented everything before she confronted her husband. And when she confronted him and his explanation didn't sit right, she kept paying attention. That is not a small thing. That is a particular kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with education or credentials. It is the intelligence of someone who trusts what they observe and takes it seriously. I want to be honest about what I did not do. For years, I had a feeling about Vincent that I set aside because I thought it was unfair, because I told myself a mother's instinct is just possessiveness dressed up as intuition. I was wrong to dismiss it. I am not saying I could have prevented what happened. I don't know that. But I know that when your body tells you something is off, it is worth the discomfort of sitting with that feeling and asking what it is trying to tell you. Ignoring it is not the same as being generous or open-minded. Sometimes it is just fear of being wrong. What I did do, once I had the evidence, once Gordon called, was stay steady. That was the only thing I had control over by then. Going to the police with organized documents rather than a tearful accusation, maintaining a normal face at family dinners, not moving before I understood what I was holding. Those 8 months between the funeral and the arrest were the longest of my life, and the only way I got through them was by making one careful decision at a time and refusing to let grief make me reckless. Vincent's choices caught up with him not because the universe punished him in some abstract way, but because Petra had done the methodical, unglamorous work of documenting the truth, and because a retired teacher in his 70s had the decency to make a phone call he wasn't obligated to make, and because I walked into a police station instead of confronting my son-in-law alone in his kitchen. Every person in this chain made a choice. The outcome was the sum of those choices. Petra deserved better than what she got, but she left the world having done everything right with what she knew. I intend to spend whatever time I have left doing the same.